Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. Earlier today, and by earlier today I mean at like 3 in the morning, it is 6 a.m. for me right now. I was going through my older videos and I was doing that specifically because sometimes I just kind of do that, and I also like to see if there's any video ideas I've made back in the day that I think are really solid. I just did a kind of piss poor job on them because it was back before I did editing, so really the videos are a bit long and drawn out. For example, and today's topic is how each school does when soloing. When I made that video, the video ended up being 16 minutes long, and it very much could have been 10 to 12 minutes. I think this video is actually going to be a bit longer because my explanation's a bit more drawn out and a bit better, but I decided that I would remake it because honestly it is a bit painful to sit through. I don't know how it has 10,000 views, but I decided as well that I would remake it. I made it in April of this year, which means my opinions have changed quite a bit since then. You don't think your opinions change that much right up until you realize that they do. Like, I know that my opinions definitely change on schools over time. So without further ado, enough rambling, let's get right into the video with how each school does when soloing. So starting off with Fire. Fire, for me, is probably one of the most solid soloing schools in this entire game. The reason that Fire is so solid is because obviously, as many of you may know, it has the highest damage in the entire game. For some reason, KingsIsle decided that Fire needed more damage than Storm, which is very strange. Obviously, the base spells still don't do as much damage, and early game, they don't have as much damage in the damage stat, but late game, past like around level 100 to 130, they start getting higher damage than Storm, which is a little bit nutty, so they have that going for them. But the main thing that separates them from Storm is that they actually have a decent HP and a decent resist, which is really funny. Like, I find that Fire is like Storm, except I live a bit more. I would say it's overall a really solid school to solo with, and overall it doesn't have too many flaws. It has a decent 4-pip AoE, arguably the best one besides maybe Rat Spin and Ship of Fools, and it has a really solid 7-pip AoE as well. It doesn't have too many problems soloing throughout much of the game, I find, and really the only problems it has soloing, I would say, is a little bit in the early game, but it gets significantly easier as time goes on. So I would say Fire is a really solid choice overall. And another thing I'm going to do, this is going to seem a bit weird at first, but you'll get used to it. I have a paint document here. You can see my brush. Basically, I'm going to make this like kind of a line graph detailing how difficult I think each school is throughout the game, just so you can kind of visualize it. I would say this is like really easy, this is really hard. I would say Fire kind of averages like a little bit above average up here in the early game, and then they kind of start upping right here, and then towards the end they're like probably top tier in regard to soloing. I would say this is pretty solid for Fire. Again, Fire's main weakness is kind of early game, is that they have a low accuracy and a little bit lower health than most wizards, but overall, nothing that most people can't solo through. Next up on our list is Ice. Now, Ice is a school that I have very mixed feelings about because I don't think it's awful. I don't think it's really inherently bad to solo from. I just think that it has some significant problems, especially early game. Now, Ice's main strengths are the fact that it has really, really good health, like insane health. You can see I have 8,000, and I'm not even really using a health setup, and I'm not even, like, I don't even have Dragoon gear yet. So obviously, my health would be even higher. I know a lot of people have 9 to 10,000 health as an Ice nowadays, so health is never an issue. And they have really good resist, with their main weakness being damage. Now, this is the late game. I would say Ice has a significant problem soloing, and that is during the early game. Ice has a really, really hard time soloing early game for 2 reasons. One, their damage is absolute garbage. Now, late game, this is kind of solved by Dragoon gear. You can see I have about 100 damage at level 130. If I had Dragoon gear, this would be raised to about 130 damage. So really solid damage and still solid resist. But early game, they don't have any damage, and their Waterworks gear only gives a pathetic 30 damage in total, compared to other schools like Fire's 60, Storm's like 70. Overall, just like crazy damage compared to what Ice gets. Even balance, which is pretty not good in regards to the damage for the gear, still gets a solid 50. Really, ice is just shafted. And the biggest thing overall, they don't get their blade until level 38. 38 is midway through Dragonspire, which is really, really crazy to me. The fact that they don't get their blade up until that level makes soloing early game really, really difficult. If I was to do my line graph again, at level 1, I would say that they're like decently mid-tier, and then they kind of go downhill actually as the other schools get stronger. They're like really not worth it to use, and they're like really bad right around here at level 60, and it isn't until level 100 that they start picking up again. And then late game they're like really solid, and in Lemuria they're actually really solid because they have the damage and they have the resist. So that looks disgustingly ugly, I know. I would say that that's like, for ice, that's how I would say the soloing experience is. Like, it starts off meh, it gets worse and worse and worse, and then it kind of like evens out at really bad throughout Arc 1 and most of Arc 2, and then it starts improving rapidly once you get to around level 100. So that was what I would say for ice. Now, I don't have a Storm Wizard on this account, so I'm just gonna select Storm here, and this is my Storm character now. Crazy. Storm, in my opinion, is either it's a really hit or miss school when it comes to soloing. It really depends on you. Now, what I mean by this is that if you are a really experienced player, a player who's been playing the game for a long time and knows what they're doing, Storm will probably be the easiest school for you to solo. If not the easiest, it will be one of the easiest schools for you to solo. But if you're new to the game, or if you don't know what you're doing, I would say Storm is one of the hardest schools in this entire game to solo. It really depends on you. And I would say the main difference is, and this is huge for me, is actually its strengths and weaknesses. Now, Storm, its strengths are the fact that it has massive amounts of damage, as I've already said earlier, but its weaknesses is that it has a very low health and a very low resist. So realistically, what Storm comes down to is killing the enemy before they kill you. Now, why this is important and what makes this difference between new players and experienced players is the fact that you need to know how to deck setup on Storm. You need to, because a lot of newer players, and even players who aren't new, like I know I did it for about 5-7 years, a lot of players, when they get new spells, will just shove them in their deck, and they'll have massive deck setups, like deck setups that have 40 to 50 cards in them. These are not optimal, and on Storm, they are even worse, because Storm is all about optimization and killing the enemy before they kill you. And if you are wasting a precious round discarding things and, not using that round to set up with a blade or a trap, it really is harmful as a Storm Wizard. And that's why I think most people die, is that they don't have a proper deck set up and they don't set up their spells and then hit in time. And that was definitely a problem that I had as a kid on Storm. But on the flip side, about a year and a half ago, I actually did a Storm Let's Play series. I don't advertise that because I'm not proud of it, but I played as a Storm Wizard on a Let's Play series, and I made it up to about Avalon before I eventually got bored. And the reason why I got bored is because it was just really easy. I never had a challenge, and I was killing everything super easily. And it's all about knowing how to set up and executing off of that. So if I draw the actual graph for Storm, it really depends, but for me, it's just like kind of a straight line here, and then Lemuria really drops off because the enemies have massive damage, and then for a newer player, it's like just flat, like that. Storm is going to be really difficult as a new player. Now, obviously, if you're somewhere in between, like if you're okay, just fine at the game, it probably is more like something like this, where it's just kind of like a line right up until Lemuria. Lemuria, the reason why I say it's like a dip is because the enemies do a lot of damage, and as a Storm, that is very painful. But Storm is solid. It just has some problems with it that I've kind of gone over at this point. And that's what I have to say for it. So let's just move on to the next wizard. Next on our list is Life. Now, Life, for me, is actually one of my favorites when it comes to soloing in this game. And I would say the reason for that is is that they have solid health, solid resist, a surprisingly good amount of damage, and then they also have healing spells, which are really, really useful when it comes to soloing and not dying when soloing. What I would say for life, and one thing I really want to illustrate, is that they have a surprising amount of damage for a non-damaging type school. And one thing I think illustrates this is that their Waterworks gear actually gives the second highest damage, flat damage, out of any Waterworks gear. And to me, this is crazy because it means that from level 60 to level, like, say 100, you could actually be like one of the highest damaging schools if you put your mind to it. Like, if you have like a, say, a 5 damage pet as a life wizard, you could probably have a solid 100 to 120 damage, like from level 60 all the way up to level 100, which is really, really crazy. And they're not wanting for other stats as well. Like, they have solid resist, solid health, solid accuracy. Power pip will be 100% because of the Waterworks gear. Overall, they're just really, really good, I would say. Life is just good for soloing. It's just solid. I can't say anything beyond that. One thing that I forgot to mention that I will put in right now, this is like in the myth section, I'm just gonna drag this back. Life's major weakness when it comes to soloing is that it doesn't have a 4-pip AoE, but this can be solved by, if you might have saw my pet on Life, it's basically the Life Kookaburra pet. It has a 4-pip Leaf Storm spell, which is really good. Obviously, Rat Spin can be farmed now, which is good as well, but overall, I'd say its major problem as a life is that 4-pip AoE, and it makes soloing early game a little bit harder, but late game, it's still fine as long as it has Forest Lord. So overall, doesn't change what I said about it, I'm just adding this now. And drawing the line graph here, I would say that they start out pretty mid-tier at level 1, and then like level 60 they jump, and then they just kind of like keep going. They're just really, really solid. So, you know, props to Life, I would say. Next up on our soloing list, we have Myth. And Myth is a very underrated school, I would say, in Wizard101. And I don't think anyone would really complain at me for saying underrated. For the longest time, Myth has kind of been dogged on as the worst school in this game. I think the main reason is the fact that their main focus is minions, and minions are absolutely garbage in this game. So people just like to trash talk Myth because of that, and I would say that that's pretty fair. They just really need to update minions. But overall, I would say Myth actually has a really, really solid soloing experience in this game, and the reason for that is that Myth is surprisingly good. Like, in terms of stats, it's really, really good nowadays. It has decent resist, decent damage. This isn't a really good example because I'm only level 40, but it has decent resist, decent damage, has decent health, and it's kind of just like fire, but not as powerful. And I would say overall that it just makes Myth a solid soloing choice. They have a good 4-pip AoE, and now that Orthros has been changed, they have a good 7-pip AoE. That Orthros change has really made Myth what it is, so Myth overall pretty good for soloing. The two main issues I would say that Myth has as of right now, minions being a focus is pretty trash because minions are trash, and then its second focus, which is stuns, is also a little bit trash because stuns have a problem where all of Arc 2 stuns are completely pointless because they made every enemy have 100% stun block. So really, if they change that, Myth would be really, really good. But overall, as of right now, it's just kind of a mid-tier solid soloing school. For the graph for Myth, I would kind of just put it as like their mid-tier level 1. They get like pretty solid, and then they're just kind of like solid through the rest of the game. They're not like particularly bad ranges like down here. They're not like really good range up here. They're just kind of like, you know, they're above average, which is the middle. You guys probably know how graphs work. I don't really need to explain it. Whatever, move on to the next school. The next school on our list, and the one I really wanted to get into today, is Death. Now, let's be honest, if you don't know it, Death is just hands down the best school to solo with in Wizard101. And the reason for that is that they have heal back. So they're exactly what Life is solid at, which is healing, except they also do damage at the same time. They have good damage, good health, good resist, and they have the heal back on top of that. overall, just a solid school when it comes to soloing, and they really don't have too many weaknesses. I'll be completely honest with you. And honestly, Death can even really be a good support character. Now, that's not really relevant in a soloing video, but Death can really hit every single branch of Wizard 101 and not have a problem doing it. Like, they look good while doing it, you know? And I would say that overall, Death is just the best soloing option. I'd say that their major weakness is not having a 4-pip AoE that's rather reasonably accessible. Obviously, they have Ship of Fools, which is the best AoE in the game, but they don't have a reasonably acceptable one besides maybe Deer Knight, which is a little bit unfortunate and is probably its biggest downside, but overall, they're still solid. To put them on that line graph, I'm gonna say that, like, they're pretty above average up until level 48 when they get Scarecrow, which I'm just gonna say is, like, right here. Up until they get Scarecrow, and then there's just, like, top tier for the rest of the game. Because obviously, if you don't have Deer Knight or you don't have Ship of Fools, you can just use Scarecrow, and Scarecrow is, without a doubt, the best 7-pip AoE in the game. Can I just say, the fact that my computer lags in the comments is really, really funny. Like, my computer is a really solid computer. It has, like, an i9 processor and, like, a 2070 NVIDIA graphics card. It's solid, but it still lags in the comments. I don't know how they managed to do that. So, you know what? I still have to wait 4 seconds before switching realms. This is tragic. Back to Humongo Frog, my home, my place of rest. Finally, on our list for soloing is Balance. Now, I am on a level 5 named Steven for Balance because I'm too lazy to sign on to my actual Balance, but I have experience soloing on a Balance. You probably know I am one of the few who's done a Balance walkthrough series on this platform, and let's be honest, Balance is not a good school to solo with at all. Balance doesn't have too many strengths or too many weaknesses because, as the title suggests, they are balanced. They have, you know, no real strength or weakness, but in regards to soloing, their major weaknesses is that realistically, their damage isn't as high as most schools, and on top of that, their blades are much weaker than most schools. And by that, it's about 10%. 10% is actually a major difference, and I would say that that's their biggest weakness when it comes to actually soloing. Now, for the final line graph that we have here, I'm gonna say that actually, like, early game, they're okay up until about, like, Judgment. Actually, let me start from up here. They're, like, okay up until Judgment's here, and then they just kind of go downhill for the rest of the game. Like, really, they don't have too many great strengths or weaknesses, in my opinion. And I think that some people might disagree with me, but I think soloing as a Balance just isn't, like, there isn't a reason to do it. There are so many other schools that are better to solo as, and Balance just overall doesn't really have a standout reason to select it over anything else. So that's my list. If I had to really go over, obviously it depends completely on what specifically you're focusing on and what arc, but overall, in regards to ease to solo, from top down, I would say Death is the easiest, followed by maybe Life and Fire. Those can be interchanged a bit. Myth is just kind of mid-tier, and then Storm is also a hit or miss. It can either be the best or the worst. Really depends on you. Followed finally by Ice and Balance. Ice has the problem where early game they are really, really difficult, and Arc 2 they're just as bad. Really, they only shine in Arc 3, and then Balance is just overall kind of meh. So let me know what you think. I hope that I can edit this down. It's 23 minutes right now. I hope I can get it to at least 15 minutes. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know. Otherwise, make sure to drop a like, hit the sub button. You know, I want to get to 5,000 at some point in my life. But otherwise, you can go support me financially on Patreon. And thank you, NJA, for being in the $25 tier. I really do appreciate that. And then finally, go join my Discord server. We should be actually at 400 members right now, so let's try to get to 500, why don't we, right? So go join that. But otherwise, that's it. Thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next video. Adios.